Hi, everyone. This is Joni McGarry. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today, I'm speaking with Joomi Kim. Joomi has a PhD in molecular biology, and she is the author of the Substack, Let's Be Clear. She started writing her Substack during COVID when she noticed two things. Number one, that the COVID narrative being promoted by institutions in the media didn't match the actual data of the papers she was reading about the same subject material. And also, when she noticed that government was censoring any kind of questioning of the COVID narrative being put forth by agencies and institutions. She started writing about institutional science and the problems with it. She since has broadened out into other topics that interest her, and she does so with an objectivity and clarity that is incredibly refreshing and informative. I really enjoy her Substack, and I'll list it in the show notes. I was very happy when she agreed to come on my show and talk about how she moved from being an enthusiastic graduate student who embraced institutional science as bedrock to someone who has woken up to question what is truth and how do we find it. So, without further delay, I'm going to share my wonderful conversation with Joomi Kim. I'd like to welcome Joomi Kim to the show. Joomi is the author of a Substack called Let's Be Clear. She is a PhD molecular biologist, and she has real clarity on a number of different issues. And I'm happy to welcome her to the show today. Hi, Joomi. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
I'm been a longtime fan of your Substack, and what I like about what you do is that you are very rooted in facts. You know, you take an issue and you look at it, to me, in a way that's very objective, and you're not like trolling for clicks. You're really trying to get to the bottom of the truth of an issue, and I think your work is terrific, and it spans a number of different topics. But where you started out was that you were a graduate student getting your PhD in molecular biology. And as we talked a little bit off camera, when you embark on something like that, you have great enthusiasm and belief in the area of study. Otherwise, you wouldn't take on such, a big task. And somehow along the way, you changed your view about institutional science and became an author on Substack, investigating many different topics that seemed to tee off of what was wrong with institutional science. So I'd love you to give us a little backstory of how that all happened and what your trajectory was.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I went to grad school because I loved biology. I always was fascinated by animals and by microbes and things like that. And I in fact as an undergrad, I didn't initially study biology, but I was a philosophy major actually. And then I worked for a little bit after that, and then I went back to school to take science classes just to get into a PhD program to, like, go into science.
Hmm.
So I went in, sort of later in life, so people who usually go later in life they've made a conscious decision. But, I went in because I loved biology, and I thought, maybe go into academia because that was the only route you could really do if you wanted to go into research. At
Hmm.
least that's how I thought of it at the time. And, the first few years you're taking classes, but once you do that, you go into research, and um, I would say that slowly over time, it can kind of um, sap your creativity, and you learn how much is spent on applying for things like grants and then worrying about writing papers. So you're making results for publishing papers, right? Because that is your primary currency. As an academic, you need to publish papers in the best possible journals, as many of those as you can.
Hmm.
And that is very different from just learning biology and discovering things within biology or science in general, right? Because,
So,
oh, yeah.
no, so go on because I have a question on that, but go ahead.
Yeah. So, because you need to find things that are packageable in a paper that makes a neat story, right, about your findings.
Hmm.
But in reality, biology is often more messy, quite a bit more messy. Um, And then also something that happened during grad school was I just saw how I got a little bit red pilled because I just saw how someone I knew who was a postdoc, he found some results that went against his uh, advisor's results. So a postdoc, they have a boss who is their advisor,
Hmm.
and it's not good if you find something that goes against your own advisor because you're in a tricky situation now because now you've found a result that can harm your boss, essentially, right?
Right.
His boss's career. And basically that stuff never got published. It got buried. And then
Did he bury it himself or did he bring it to the boss? Like, what was the interaction there?
he brought it to the boss
Mhm.
and conversations were had behind closed doors, which I was not privy to.
Mhm.
But basically it never got published.
Mhm.
And to this day, it's never been published. These were the kind of results where like they're negative results, meaning like they showed that an effect didn't happen, which we thought did happen previously, right?
Mhm.
And they're not like super sexy results for that matter because it's not discovering some new kind of pathway or things like that. So it's just showing that like, oh, there was an artifact in previous results. And this kind of thing, you can have trouble publishing that, but he might have been able to publish it somewhere, but in fact, it never got published. And there was also this tricky situation because he was not an American citizen, so he had to rely on a work visa as well. So like he didn't want to get like fired. So
Of course.
yeah, so it just never got published. But even after he left, he could have published it, but he never published it because like why burn the bridges, right? You know,
Well, because it threatens, I mean, I think it seems to me it's all about funding, right? So if you're not working toward things that your funders agree with or want you to find or support, or if you threatens previous work,
yeah,
it seems like you're not really in a position to ask basic questions and discover the truth of something. Is that sum it up?
yeah,
What
yeah.
you've started to see?
Yeah, because if he had published that, it would have led to retractions of his advisor's papers, which
I see.
which would have been really bad. Like in that world, it's very bad to have one of your papers retracted.
Hmm.
And by the way, I think that that's a terrible kind of thing within academia. Like it should be a regular occurrence that things can get retracted or parts of the paper, like, and where it's not a big deal because mistakes happen, and we need to be able to like admit them, but you can't do that very well in academia.
Right.
So if these things just stay published, these kind of false results, and other people are reading this and basing their own theories or hypotheses on these false results. And so I saw this happen, and it was very, I don't know what the word is, but
Disillusioning.
yes, yeah, yeah. And by then I was also kind of a bit disillusioned also with like the whole process in academia anyway. So before I even finished my PhD, I was like, I'm not sure that academia is right for
Hmm.
me for many other reasons too. I mean, people have to do postdocs where you get paid very little to, you know, teach and work like a dog. And even then, it's not guaranteed that you get an academic position. So the
Hmm.
whole thing is messed up anyway, but even before all this. But I also got a sense that there was probably a lot of fraud. Um, e Even then, I was underestimating it, I think. It wasn't until later, once COVID started, which I can get to, where I
Hmm.
fraud was so rampant, but I was starting to get a sense for how much fraud must be rampant in academia. And I mean, for people who don't know, also, everything is just based on trust. Um it's not as if work regularly gets, retested. So
So it's
journal
not even clear that something that is reported is even that reproducible, which I
Yeah,
think is becoming problematic. 'Cause
yeah,
people are realizing that it's not reproducible.
yeah, yeah. Most people aren't trying to reproduce other people's results.
Mhm.
It happens occasionally, but it's quite rare. The kind of funding that people get, it's not for things like that. It's for
Mhm.
trying to find novel things. So, yeah,
Um,
I mean,
and and when you say, like, fraud, I think some people would say, "Wait, what? These people aren't fraudsters, they're academics, they wouldn't do something like that intentionally." It sounds like there probably is overt fraud, but there's probably also just a lot of fraud, what I would call, like, soft fraud, where people are feeling under pressure not to report something or to leave something alone, and what you described before, it creates a pile of untruths because the basis of it is not necessarily true, and then people are piling on top of that paper or those results, and that's fraudulent. But I think it's important to point out that these people are not setting out to commit fraud, or they wouldn't see themselves that way, because I think some people just would never accept that word. It's just too hot of a word. But I totally understand exactly what you're talking about. And I think it's rampant. It seems to me to be rampant.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's different shades of fraud, and I would
Hmm.
say, like, when you don't produce negative results, I'm calling that fraud.
Hmm.
Y the
It's
I
fraud
mean,
by omission.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's a lie.
nobody goes into academia wanting to commit fraud, but I think it happens along the way due to the pressures, and people can justify it to themselves,
Hmm.
you know, like, "Oh, this isn't gonna be that bad to, like, leave this little thing out because, it still kind of fits in with this," or they can
Hmm.
justify, like, taking out certain results, including selectively including some things, you know? Um, yeah, I just think that it happens in such a gradual way. Most people don't wanna be fraudsters, but I
Right.
think it ends up happening, and there's no way to estimate for certain, like, what the percentage is, but my guess is that it's quite a bit higher than people realize, and
Hmm.
people should not think that scientists or graduate students or postdocs, that they're not any better than your average human, when it comes to morality or things like
Hmm.
that. And, I think almost anyone, like, they could be tempted, you know?
Or under pressure because they feel like they wouldn't get the funding next year, or they need to
Uh,
advance, or they have a family to support, all of the things.
yeah, the price
Or
to publish is
yeah.
so high.
So
Uh,
this was before COVID, where you're starting to see this and thinking, well, that maybe this, the shine is off the apple, or whatever you would say. Like, you're seeing sort of the real workings of it. What
yeah.
happened when COVID hit? Because you were still in academia at that time.
No, no, no,
Um,
I was
oh,
out of academia,
oh, you were out. Okay.
totally
And
out.
so COVID hits, and what do you start to see, and how does it change your view of science, of the science in quotes?
Um, yeah, initially, I thought the whole lockdown thing was a bit crazy, but I wasn't thinking about it too much.
Mhm.
Um, as well as vaccines, like, I didn't really question vaccine
Mhm.
safety too much. Um, but, I can't remember exactly when it was when I started to have questions. It might have been through listening to some podcast, like maybe Brett Weinstein, I
Mhm.
can't remember exactly, but that might have, you know, introduced some questions in my mind, but, at a certain point, I started to do my own research,
Mhm.
and because I was like, "Alright, I gotta just know," so the only way to know for sure is to, like, try to look into it myself, and
And you weren't writing at this point yet? You
no,
were
no, I wasn't
okay.
planning to write or be public about any of this. I had, like, a regular job, and, like, that wouldn't have been good for my career, right, to be
Right.
vaccine skeptic. But basically, yeah, I started looking into that, and then the only reason I started writing was because I just couldn't believe what I was finding. I was like, "This is crazy that, like, what the CDC is saying just does not match up with, like, what's in even just literature," you know? Um and, so just based on that, you could tell that, okay, some people are not telling the truth, right? Our
Mhm.
health officials, which is not a good look. And
Mhm.
so my level of trust went way down after that. And,
Can
and
you
then
give a couple examples of, the glaring things that the CDC that you found were not matching the data that you were looking at in papers, or
yeah,
in, reported science?
yeah. Well, the first article I wrote was about spike protein, and the our health agencies were saying things like, spike protein is, not harmful, and it doesn't move around in the body. It stays in the arm near where it was injected, and, doesn't last for very long.
Mhm.
And, slowly over time, you'd find papers that would just contradict all of those.
Mhm.
Um, the first was about spike protein not being toxic, because by then we had papers showing some evidence that, in fact, it was cytotoxic, was it could harm cells, right? So for the CDC to say that there's absolutely no problem, it's like, well, if you were being honest, you'd say that, well, there is some evidence that there could be some issues, right?
Mhm.
So at the very least. And so they weren't saying that. So I was like, these people are liars, you know?
And then you start wondering, why are they lying? What are they lying in service of? Like, why can't they just present the actual facts and let people decide whether to take an intervention or not.
Yeah, yeah. And, by the way, like, no, somebody does not have to have a PhD in biology or anything like that to realize that they're lying, because if people just did their own research, they could see some very basic things. Like, you don't need a PhD in biology or
Mhm.
um, be a medical doctor or anything just to see that. Like, it's very easy to see if you just do like a little bit of your own research. But anyway, so yeah, I saw that. I saw that they were lying. And then I got even more red pilled about how bad of papers can be. Like, when I started to see some papers where the abstract of the paper said something different from the results, right? So I
Mhm.
had actually never encountered this before, because, like, in the field that I was in for my PhD, it was not like pharmaceutical related where you'd see something strange like this. And this was the first time I saw this, and I was like, wow, this is truly bizarre. Like, it just was so insane to me that the authors themselves were kind of obfuscating results of vaccine harms. Their own results would show very alarming things about a vaccine, and then the abstract would just kind of gloss over it or say something like contradictory. And
Just so that for people who are listening who may not know what an abstract is in a paper, and when you talk about a paper, you're talking about a peer-reviewed paper published in some kind of journal that should have gone through some rigor, um,
yeah,
and, it's published by, either one or more scientists, and what is an abstract, and what what is an abstract?
the abstract is just a short summary in the beginning of the paper that shows, like, what is the paper about and what was the main finding. And a lot of times people only read the abstract.
Mhm,
And that's why the abstract is so important, because that's what a lot of people will just get out of the paper. But unfortunately, you can't just read the abstract, because sometimes the abstract can be a bit misleading,
mhm,
and will kind of obfuscate things. And so, yeah, I saw that, and that was highly disturbing to me. So, yeah, just slowly over time, I saw things like this, where I saw that, like, academia and medicine was just a lot more rotten than I had even gotten a hint of in grad
mhm.
school.
And when you discovered it was, like, more rotten, was this all around the COVID vaccine program? Um, and then you started to think if it's like this here, what is it like other places? Was that the main area?
Yeah, it started with the COVID vaccines, but
Mhm,
then also uh, early treatments as well, like what I was seeing in some of the studies there. Because there's a lot of funny business there too. But then
mhm,
since then, I am now more skeptical of a lot of things,
mhm.
especially if pharma is anywhere near it. Um, big pharma, yeah. But you know what? Even with a big pharma, there's a lot of fraud. So yeah, but it is worse in medicine, I think.
Well, I think what's interesting is like when you say you don't have to have a PhD to look at something like this, and the public was cautioned against doing their own research. We had to trust the experts, and I think there's still, I think that is still the message today about everything. Um, what's interesting to me is some of the people who were most credentialed in academia, in medicine, especially physicians. Either they weren't curious or they were so, armored against, questioning the narrative that they didn't see the signals and the obvious safety issues. I mean, even if, for instance, even if you were on the side that vaccines were effective and were needed for whatever reason and people should take them, just the notion that people were injured by these things, because there's always an injury, and that these people were being demonized and kicked to the curb and not taken care of by the people that were mandating that they get the product, that should have been a red flag to everybody. And yet it still didn't awaken curiosity in academics and doctors. And I still think to this day that exists. What do you make of that? What causes a person like you to say, "Whoa, something's not working here," and then somebody else to just dismiss it out of hand? People who are otherwise very intelligent.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like, I think that a lot of those people have the capacity to understand, but
Of course.
they don't want to really look, because it would just either maybe shatter their worldview a little too much, or it's just politically too polarized, where, like, you don't want to look at evidence, because then you're politically in a place where you don't think of yourself on like
Mhm,
the right or the fringe or something like that.
mhm,
Um, it's groupthink to some level, right? Like, because the experts have said this, so, like, why would you question it?
mhm.
And Yeah, so many things. I think also when it comes to uh, doctors and also some academics, they surprisingly don't know how to critically read papers sometimes. Like I would say, like even when I was in grad school, I wasn't fully prepared to analyze these kinds of papers. Like I said, I'd never encountered, for example, a situation where the abstract was different from the results, right? So that
Right.
was not something I was on the lookout for. So I only learned that later, you know?
Well,
And I think a lot of doctors are not even aware that that's like a thing, and that's
right.
very important results get hidden in supplementary material too, for example.
Mhm.
They just don't know all the ways in which pharma also can meddle in the papers themselves,
Right.
you know? And so they take it a little bit too much at face value,
Right,
a little.
because who would ever think that somebody would be, like, deceptive or even just stupid enough to put one thing in the abstract that the paper doesn't match, like, that's so easily discoverable if somebody wants to just look, right?
It's
It's
so
like
funny that you say it's easily discoverable because it's not easily discoverable, that's the thing. It's like individual people have discovered it, but it's still not like a well-known thing,
right. But
and
but
even
it
if
is discoverable. Somebody
right,
couldn't
right, but it's, like,
and
hidden in plain sight in many ways.
right, right. I mean, and if we had if we had a media that was truly curious and was
Yeah,
looking for truth, that would have been completely different.
yeah. I mean, this
Um,
would be something like if you're a science journalist, like, you might talk about that, but there's a lot of science journalism is absolutely terrible.
yeah.
But
Well, that's been clear to me throughout this whole thing. You were saying that some people hesitate to look because you find yourself, I think you said, in a political situation or a part of a group that you didn't set out to be part of, or, like a year ago, you would have never imagined you could hold such views. In reading your Substack, that happened to you where you started out in one place and then had to shift to another way of being. Like you were a supporter of Bobby Kennedy, which I don't know if that was something you would ever have thought you would have been to begin with. And then something happened when he dropped out. And you talk about this. Can you tell me about that journey and moving from that, somebody who's probably more on the political left, as many of us were, to being in a position to support somebody different completely?
yeah. No, yeah, I'd never thought of myself as an anti-vaxxer or anything like that, and yeah, as you mentioned, I was politically on the left, and what I knew of Bobby Kennedy was he was, like, kind of a kooky guy. I didn't know too much about him, but I knew that he had these anti-vax positions, and, that's what I thought of, also, what was her name? The actress who has been talking about autism and vaccines.
Oh, Jim Carrey's ex-wife. I know, I can
Right, yeah,
yeah,
so
I used to think she was nuts, and I look
yeah,
back on that and I think, "Well, why did I just dismiss her out of hand
yeah,
with such, like, vehemence?" And you never stop to think, like, if a mother has an injured child, they know something.
yeah,
Like yeah, so anyway, go on. I can't
yeah,
think of her name now either, but
yeah, but, I mean, I didn't think about it too much, but I
yeah,
in
same.
general, I felt like they were a little bit kooky, Um, but, yeah, at a certain point, I'm just like, "Well, maybe these people now have a point," you know? And it's an uncomfortable situation to find yourself in slowly moving in this direction, but, because, at the time, like, I had a regular job and it's not good for your career and almost any career to, like,
Well, it's not good for your social life either.
yeah,
Your familial relationships, much less it
yeah.
changes everything, and did that happen to you as well? Like, you're like, "Oh, here I am, stranger in a strange land."
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, because most of my friends were not there, with me, and, I was lucky that my parents are a little bit more open-minded, so like, my mother was a nurse, and so she kind of sometimes would see that doctors can be a little bit stupid sometimes, so she was a little bit questioning of medicine and stuff like or taking too many drugs and things,
Mhm,
so she had some common sense, okay, there.
mhm,
So I was a bit lucky there, but yeah, with a lot of friends, I would never bring up, like, my Substack or whatever, even during the COVID times, but sometimes it would come up, and then I would have to say a little something, just
mhm.
and, usually that was okay, but I would say that, over time, there were some tensions, though, when it came to who to vote for. Like once RFK, like, dropped out and went on the side of Trump and things like that. And then people who found that out about me, like they had some issues, right? So
Mhm.
it was more about that. The vaccine thing, there was some tension there, but it's not like I don't think I actually. Oh no, I might have lost one friend over that. I'm still unclear about why she was talking to me, and I suspect it had to do with like Substack. But aside from that, like I don't know. I think surprisingly, a lot of people are now a little bit more. If they're not thinking about it explicitly, they're like, yeah, maybe there was a problem with it, but they don't,
Mhm. Mhm.
so they're a little bit more red pilled on it.
So, okay, so you're writing about the science and then you start broadening out to other areas. And is that just because you sort of thinking if you started thinking if this is rotten, then I got to talk about all of it because it's all related. It seems to me sort of to be all related. And there's so much that we can question now and so much coming at us. I'm interested in like you've talked about like your last podcast recording was on Nick Fuentes, and you did one on Chelsea Clinton's new podcast, which sounds just dreadful. Um, Tell me how you've moved into these areas, and it seems like you bring the same skepticism and objectivity to those things that you have also to institutional science.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've always had a lot of interests, not just in science, so that was part of it. But I think also from COVID, I realized how there's no way that a lot of the history that we've been taught is all correct.
Mhm.
Like from COVID, it's like these broadly speaking, two different populations have a very different idea of what happened, right?
Yes, in real time.
Yes, in real time. And with all this technology available to us where we can video record all kinds of things, right? And we have all these media articles supposedly telling us what's going on. So you could be informed. And yet I saw that half the population felt very differently about like what was
Mhm,
actually happening. And it's like, well, the people who write the history books, like which side are they on? And so I've gotten a lot more interested in things like history and just
mhm.
culture and the evolution of culture and where do we fall in, like historically speaking. So I guess that's sort of been an interest of mine recently. And I had a horrible history education growing up, and I just want to try to learn more. And even though I'm skeptical of most of what I read, but
Right.
something, it's still something to like learn the basic things happening there and try to figure out where do we fall in the trajectory of history and where are we going. So I'm
Right,
very,
and what parts of our actual experience right now are gonna be buried,
yeah,
and what has been buried even 10, 15, 20 years ago. When I think about things that were happening in real time in my own life, I mean, I'm 63, right? So I've lived through some things. Um, I remember them in a certain way, and now I think, what was really happening? Because I wasn't awake then. I wasn't really looking. So I think many people are feeling the way you're feeling. But I think the people who aren't is it seems like we're just consuming completely different media diets,
yeah.
and I attribute that statement to Josh Stileman because we talk a lot about that. It just depends on the media you're consuming, what your worldview is. And I think that, they're good at dividing us into those little bubbles for sure. And what I like about your work is that you try to bridge that. Again, you're not coming at it with a certain point of view. You're trying to unpack things. So I think that's just amazing. And that's why I like your work so much.
Yeah, I would like to have I started a series called the Red Pill series that's supposed to be like that. I don't know how well I've succeeded at it so far, but trying to red pill people a little bit.
And for somebody who might not know, what is red pilling? Because
Oh,
some people don't know what that is.
yeah, it's just from the Matrix where
Mm-hmm.
I mean this gives away the story of the Matrix, but where if you take the red pill, you see things for the way they really are. Your eyes are opened.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be red or blue, politically red or blue, but it just kind of works out where yeah, red pilling is supposed to be where you see things for behind this false matrix.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
You see things for how they are, and it's actually sometimes it's not very pleasant. I will tell you, um, as you know. So now Trump's in office, and he is elected, well, in part because of the whole, Maha Bobby Kennedy contingent, right, who were brought over to that voting camp because they were promised some things, or by implication, and that Bobby was going to be put in a position to make real change in medical freedoms, and straightening out the corruption and fraud that was in HHS, et cetera. um, there's a lot of disappointment in what's happening, and people are starting to look at it a little differently. Where do you think we are with all that? How do you see the landscape of what's happened since Trump has gotten in office, as a Kennedy supporter?
Well, I am frustrated with how slowly things move, but at the same time, I try to keep in mind that I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. And so I err a little bit more on the side of trying to be supportive while like coming out with criticisms. But what I don't want, and I sometimes suspect happens, is when we make their job harder when there's interests, like pharma interests or whatever, that try to divide Maha and turn against Kennedy to make it
Hmm.
harder for him to try to do what he's trying to do. So, because I'm still broadly supportive in that sense, meaning like I think he wants to try to do the right thing, but there's a lot of a lot of constraints, and I don't know what they are. We just don't know, unless you are in it
Right.
yourself. And so sometimes there are things that look very puzzling to me, like the whole thing with Ozempic or whatever, but I'm like, I don't actually know for certain if I were in that position, like, would I do something differently? I can't know, you know?
Well, maybe you couldn't do it. Like, there's probably a lot of horse trading going on.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's the reality of politics,
Yeah.
and it's ugly. And, I think it can be easy to just throw mud and say, like, "You're not doing it fast enough," or whatever, and I think that could be a little bit childish.
Hmm.
Um, so we're just gonna have to see in the end what because things happen so slowly also, it's like, we don't even have a CDC director right now. We have an interim person, right? So there, like, a lot
Hmm.
of still have to be filled. It's absolutely ridiculous how slow things are in government.
It's crazy. Yes.
It's insane. I mean, in my opinion, actually, we should get rid of a lot of these agencies. Like, that's the best thing that RFK can do. But
What would you get rid of?
well, for the CDC for one,
Yeah.
and then even the FDA. I mean, it's not like I have this all worked out in my head, but I think that there are a lot of things that we like could have happened in a more decentralized way to basically do the job of the FDA, but more decentralized, right? Not
Hmm.
centralized government. So, but anyway, where was I going? So yeah, I am still broadly supportive, but yes, I am frustrated at how slow things are.
What would you like to see happen? What do you think should be, like, in terms of, like, the COVID shots, the vaccine schedule broadly, or any other areas in HHS? If he could move more quickly, or if the organizations were more nimble, and more um, really interested in the health of our population, um, what would you like to see? That's kind of a put you on the spot question, because I'd have to think about that too.
Yeah, I have to think about that. I haven't thought deeply enough about it, but I suppose um, I'd want to think more long term because we're not always going to have an administration where Bobby Kennedy could be head of HHS, right?
Mm. I
And
think this is the best we're going to get.
yeah,
Actually, I mean, I
I
I
agree
agree with you.
that we're going to get anyone more,
Well, it's
friendly.
not even the person, it's just the opportunity that a person with that mindset could actually get in that position. I mean, it's just not g there's so many, forces against something like that,
Yeah,
that it's hard to imagine it could happen again.
yeah, yeah. So long term, and I don't think that this is something that Kennedy can do alone, but something like getting rid of liability, the liability shield. So something
Mhm. And
because
that's the 1986 vaccine liability shield that takes away any, financial liability, takes it off of the vaccine companies entirely if that vaccine is on the childhood schedule.
yeah. And the reason I say something like that, as opposed to just pulling individual vaccines off the market, is just that just pulling things off the market like that can easily be undone, in
Mhm.
another administration. So something that changes the whole landscape. Um, so it would have to be things like that, in my opinion, or like I said, getting rid of agencies entirely.
Mhm, mhm,
Um, so I think more about things like that as opposed to like getting rid of individual vaccines, which I
mhm.
think are safe. And I think there are vaccines that are unsafe that should have never been on the market. But I don't know that that's what Kennedy is planning to do because he explicitly said multiple times that he wasn't planning to take people's vaccines away.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think also doing that will cause kind of an uproar in the people who are
Right. Who
vaccinophiles, who love their vaccines and don't want them taken away. So
Well, I spoke recently to somebody I deeply care about who just said, "I rely on vaccines to keep me and my family safe, and so I find this very, very threatening." And you know, I have to respect. I think as individuals in a free society, just have to respect somebody's point of view on that. But I agree with you. I think if companies were responsible for the safety of their products and they knew they could face massive lawsuits for an unsafe product, they would put safer products on the market or not put those products on the market. I mean, it's such a moral hazard, and I think even most people don't even know that that's a thing. That those products, if they get injured, they can't sue the company. And if they do sue, they have to sue the US government. And they're very often not compensated, especially if it's the COVID vaccine,
yeah,
which is another area entirely that's an even greater moral hazard, in my opinion, because that was a product that was rolled out without a lot of research. And and people say like nobody was forced to take that, but people were mandated to take it to keep their jobs or to go to school. And I don't know if in your workplace that was happening, but um, it was happening everywhere. So that's a hard choice for people to have to be faced with.
yeah.
I mean, that's big coercion.
No, yeah. I mean, that was forced in my opinion. Yeah. So, and I don't know if there's something else that can be done in HHS to make it so that that can never happen again under another administration. I don't know what that could be unless you just get rid of some of these agencies
Hmm.
entirely. So,
For
but I don't
sure.
necessarily think that's going to happen. But you asked me what I would love, and that
Yeah.
was
Yeah, I would love everything to be under the Idaho Medical Freedom Act, which, if you're unfamiliar, Leslie Manukian and her organization got a bill passed in Idaho that basically does just that. It just,
uh,
pardon me?
it says you can never mandate something.
Anything. You can't mandate testing. You can't mandate wearables. You can't mandate any intervention for people to participate in society, period, full stop. And it can't be done again. And that law also can't be reversed. So it's like this magical thing where it allows people real autonomy over their bodies, which is something I don't think we have here. But anyway, so with your Substack, where do you see it going in the future? Is this something that you're committed to full time? And are there other areas you are thinking about looking at?
Um, yeah, I've sort of been spending more time doing the videos, and the Substack has just been a way to announce my videos lately.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's something I want to continue, and I really just make videos about things that happen to interest me
Hmm.
that are sort of cultural or political sometimes, um um and sometimes medical related too. I am working on something that's medical related right now. We'll see if I can finish it. But yeah, it's still ongoing.
Now, have you found that through this work, are you reaching people that are you helping people come along to open their eyes a little bit and start questioning things? Not so much to take your point of view necessarily or the conclusions you have, but maybe opening their mind a little. Have you gotten feedback on that? In real life and also virtually.
Yeah, I've heard more virtually, people who might just send me a message there, and that's very gratifying. I would say in my personal life, it's a little hard to say because I think some people around me, they might have shifted their position, and I can't tell how much was because of me or some other things that happened.
Hmm.
But I will say that some people around me have shifted, which is a great thing. Where they're a bit more open-minded about certain things. But I can't say whether it's because of my work.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah. But
And be Go ahead.
oh, no, no, I mean, it's mixed, it's mixed, and
Yeah.
some people I think reacted violently against my work,
But that
different.
can also be very useful, because at least it creates a response in somebody, and maybe it'll cause them to question something. But I found that for me, I didn't wake up until I woke up, and I think during COVID, the minute I heard vaccine, like I really was afraid at first, I bought the whole narrative. I look back on that and I think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. But the minute they started talking about a vaccine, there was just something, and I was all on for vaccines. I never questioned them at all. And I just thought, oh, this is where we're going. And this doesn't sound very good to me because I worked in biotech and I knew the history of that platform and that it wasn't a particularly safe platform and they hadn't worked out the safety issues. So, anyway, it was interesting. Back to academia, which, you're not in any longer, but I in order to fix the science in academics, structurally, what do you think has to happen, and do you think it could happen? Like, there are a lot of changes now in the university landscape, mostly driven by politics, which is unfortunate because I don't think pushing one way is the way to fix what's happened there. But how could things be different in academia for people, doing science?
Oh, yeah, good question. It's something I've thought about, and I don't know that I have all the answers, but I will say I don't think that it's working right now where researchers have to write these grants saying what they're gonna find, why it's important, and that's why they should get money. Um, and I'm not sure that it's good that the government is funding most of the research.
Because it is, right? I mean,
Yeah.
colleges, even private colleges, for those who don't know, get enormous funds from the US government through the NIH, through all sorts of agencies. For instance, when I was doing no college mandates, like the Ivy League schools, for instance, I think they took $3 to $5 billion a year from the government. And in fact, just one person at one of the schools who wrote the COVID mandate policies for the school he got $750,000 from the NIH to run his own lab. So it's that kind of thing. So they are heavily funded by government. But if they didn't have those funds, who would fund it? I'm not suggesting they should have them, but that's the tricky part.
No, it is tricky, yeah. Um, there are some things that I think would be funded, uh, privately just because there would be an incentive, people would want to fund that, and, like, I mean, it's kinda funny because I sometimes make fun of people like Brian Johnson. He's this guy who's like a rich guy who is doing experiments on himself, on longevity, and he says he never wants to die. Have you heard of this guy?
I have not. Tell me more.
Well, he does all kinds of experiments on himself,
How
and
old is he?
he's,
About?
oh, maybe early 40s, I think, something like that.
And
And
is he a scientist?
no, 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 he's not a scientist. He's just this, like, I think he's a billionaire or something, and he
Mhm.
just funds this research and does experiments on himself and his son, actually.
Oh
And
gosh.
and
Oh, no.
and, I mean, it's not like crazy experiments, it's
Yeah.
just dietary stuff and sauna and, red light therapy and all these things, and they rely on a lot on biomarkers because you don't really know whether you're gonna live forever, or he's not gonna live forever, but he's saying that he will. Or so they have to rely a lot on biomarkers, and this is where I have my issues with him, but I will say that, like, what I like about what he's doing is that, like, this is privately funded, and it's just a like, this is what decentralized, like, sort of science would look like. I think also that there are things that technology can help with this. I'm not saying it can solve it entirely, but I think that, there are a lot of researchers out there who would like to maybe get out of the particular research they're doing, but it's very hard to do that when they're in academia. Like, when you're in academia, and let's say you study something in cancer, right? But you wanna move out and just study, like, E. coli or microbes or something, right?
Mhm.
This is considered a huge jump, even though they're both within biology. But
Mhm.
It's very unusual to just make a jump like that, which I think is stupid because if you're a biologist, you can make that leap. You have to do some catching up where you read the literature on microbes and things like that. But like, I think it's always a good thing to like branch out, right? A lot of
Well,
research.
yeah, and you can bring your expertise to other fields too. Like
Exactly.
it
Exactly.
builds knowledge. Yeah.
Yes, and then you bring fresh blood into that, like, subfield. And right now in academia, like, it's very difficult to do that, and you can't get funding usually if, like, you wanna move to microbe research, but all you've done is, like, cancer research, right? It's very difficult for you to do that. It's probably impossible.
Hmm.
But, I think that there's something to be explored there where the researchers can go out of their field. And I think it's only a win-win because I know that there are researchers who would love to be able to do that because you may just be ready to move on from the subfield you're in. And if you are ready to move on and you don't want to be studying that subfield, like you're not going to produce your best work if you're not interested or passionate in it.
Oh, it's like anything else,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then also this is a little bit weird, but like I think incentives lining up is one of the best things you do. So meaning like if you are a researcher and let's say you have a certain disease or your wife has a certain disease or something, you are very motivated to try to find a cure, right?
Of
So if
course,
you want to
yes.
move into that field, it should be very easy for you to do it, you know?
Because
And
you'd be one of the best people. I mean,
yeah,
if
you'd be
assuming
motivated.
you had the basic set of, like,
Yeah,
research skills, you'd be the best because you're so motivated.
yeah. And I think people these days underestimate how much people can just leap into a different subfield. We're just talking about different subfields within biology here.
Mhm,
But right now, people are so narrow minded in academia, like, well, you don't know about microbes because you did cancer research. I mean, that's so
mhm,
silly. Like, basic biology, basic molecular biology, you can move into it. But right now it's, they say you're not an expert in microbiology,
mhm.
which is so silly. But that's where we are in academia. It's so silly. So things like that. And one other thing that I've thought about is that sometimes there are independent researchers who might want to study something, but they can't justify spending the time on it, but there might be people who are willing to back them financially for a certain period of time to do it. Like if they are familiar with their work and they're like, you know what, I want to fund you to do this. And this is something where technology can actually match people up like that. So I've thought
So
that a
so
lot.
sort of like a dating service for funders, and does anything like that exist?
The closest I can think of is like a Kickstarter, right? Where
Mhm,
like, but that's not really like a research focused thing, but it would look something like that where like I guess if a researcher said like, you know what, I might want to like do research into this, but this is going to be like a 6 month thing. But if you like have faith in me and you want to put money into this, right? Then you could help fund this project.
I think
So,
we just came up with a new platform that you can, build out and run, Jumi.
well, somebody should do it. I don't want to do
Yeah.
this. I'm just out there. So somebody, if they want to do that, please do it.
Yeah, because I think in the beginning it could work, and then, of course, I don't know, I think I'm a little cynical on eventually something like that gets directed in a certain way, but if you had a pool of people who had money, who could pick and choose and weren't in it, like, there wasn't huge money in it, but a number of people funding, that might be something very interested to get some basic science done. And maybe it exists, I don't know, but I like the idea. Because
Well,
it was sort of like the Brownstone, right? So the Brownstone will, give people fellowships and scholarships who have, like, lost their livelihood because they dared question the narrative during COVID, and it allows them to continue to do research, either, journalistically or scientifically, that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do because there are no corporate big funders or academic funders to keep them afloat.
yeah.
So it's
Well,
kind of neat.
when you look at Kickstarter, there's a lot of people who are funding that are just regular everyday people.
Hmm, hmm.
So I don't know. I don't know if it could work or not, but I'm just thinking of things.
Well, that's how things get born. So, okay, you're doing this Substack. I think you're an excellent communicator about a number of different topics in a way that can get people to open their minds. If you were talking to somebody in academia or in science who has embraced the narrative, what would be a couple of things you would say to them when they say, that the science is real, that there's no bad science, that what you're saying is, ridiculous. What are a couple things you could point out to somebody like that that might make them say, "Oh, well, maybe I'll look into it more."
What would I say to somebody who,
Is
is
a true believer.
oh,
Yeah, yeah.
um,
Not to change again, it's not to make people believe what I believe or you believe or whatever. It's just to get people to see the gaps in um their certain narratives, which I think is useful for anyone. And it's useful even to people that like I find that I agree with mostly. Sometimes I think they take it too far and they don't allow that they have holes in their arguments too. And I think that's the most interesting thing we can all do for each other, I think, is to help people see where there are holes in their foundations.
yeah. Well, I think if I were talking to someone like that, I would tell them to dig deeper on whatever it was on the topic that something they're interested in,
Mhm.
whether it's vaccines or something like that. And if you just dug a little bit deeper and just for a moment, just put the trust in the experts aside, and it's okay to just look into it, right?
Mhm.
If you really were to look into it a little deeper, you might start to find holes. And then I would point out like some of the things you can look for, an example being when you find data that doesn't match the abstract, for example,
Mhm. Right.
things like that.
Okay. And then we're sort of nearing up to the end of our time. And what I like to ask people I talk to in this chaotic world, because there's media coming at us so quickly all the time. What starts out being a concern in one area, like medical freedom or biology truth or whatever, good science, it spreads into everything else, and for me, and I think it sounds like for you too, you start seeing there's so much that's broken. And maybe it was always this way. I don't know. It feels worse now than it used to be. But what I'm interested in is how do you live a really good life in spite of that, in the midst of the chaos? Like, do you have any um, advice for people on how to do that? Like, what your practice is for leading a happy and productive life in this chaos?
Well, I certainly try to take some breaks from the news sometimes. Um, and I often will try to keep in mind also that uh, some of the worst case scenarios that I think about, it's possible I'm wrong about that, and so
Hmm.
if I'm panicking about it, then I might be panicking about something that's not even true. Um, that and getting outside and doing other things besides things related to, cultural or political things. It's always good to just keep that in mind, and things like cooking or gardening and reading fiction. Actually, that's a
Oh,
nice.
same. What are you reading?
I've been reading Anna Karenina. I got a little stuck in the middle there, but I've been reading that for many months now.
I read it again this year.
Oh, really?
And, yeah, and I'm trying to remember the translation I read, and I liked it better than the previous translations that I had read. I love that book. I think it's a masterpiece, so that's cool that you're reading it.
Yeah. I started off strong reading it. I was really into it, and then I went on a trip and stopped reading it, and then I got kind of like, you know, being separated from it. The
You have
momentum,
to get
but I have to get back into it.
well, the problem is everyone knows what happens at the end, but
Well, that's true. That's
still,
part of it. It's like I don't wanna get to that part, right? Knowing that it doesn't have a happy ending, and
yeah,
I kinda like
well,
Anna Karenina and knowing that she's, it kinda sucks knowing that it doesn't end well. So,
yeah, poor Anna,
yeah.
poor Anna.
Yeah.
Um, all right, well, I think this was a great conversation, and I've really enjoyed talking to you. Where can people find you? And I'll list everything in the show notes. Where can they find you and your work?
Uh, on my Substack, which is joomi.substack.com, and then my YouTube channel, which, I forget my handle, but I'll give it but it's
I'll make sure it's in there. Are you also on Twitter?
yes, yes,
Okay.
on Twitter as well. I'll just send you that.
Okay. I'm sure I have all of them, but I'll make sure they're in the thing. And any other last thoughts you have?
Uh, no, that's it.
Well, it was a delight to talk to you. I'm so glad we got to connect and keep up
Likewise.
the good work. I love your work.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Thank
me.
Thanks, Jumi.